90s television was chock full of episodic animated shows focused on the day-to-day antics of its young characters. While plenty of these shows presented worlds which were a bit larger than life, many popular shows tended to stick with storylines that reflected real-life everyday struggles, albeit with wacky and colorful characters. They told stories about family and friendship and learning the difference between right and wrong. I consumed plenty of this TV growing up, but there's something about Hey Arnold that has really stuck with me for the past 20 years, and I find myself going back to it every once in a while. There's something calming and sincere about its premise and execution, something vaguely comforting about the modest adventures of this kid with a strangely shaped head. It might be the jazz music or the show's slow-paced nature, but Hey Arnold feels like a lasting reminder of the dignity in leading a simple but kind existence, and I'm going to try to explore how it accomplishes this. Several episodes begin with Arnold daydreaming about being somewhere else, doing much more extraordinary things. As a character, he started off the same way years before the show aired, when he first appeared in 3 claymation shorts by show creator Craig Bartlett, and later in a 10-minute pilot episode aired in theaters before Harriet the Spy. Watching Arnold fantasize about grander adventures is ironic, considering one of the main reasons I'm impressed by the show is its unique choice to embrace the mundane. Arnold's life obviously isn't dull by any means. He's being raised by eccentric grandparents in a boarding house full of other random eccentric people. Every time he opens the door to his building, a hodgepodge of house pets scurry out. There are plenty of things about his life that can be considered bizarre or noteworthy. When I say the show embraces the mundane, I'm mostly referencing its pacing. It often includes quiet, actionless moments where Arnold is simply thinking and reflecting. Take this scene in the 2nd episode of the series. Nothing really happens, he's just lying on his couch, but it acts as a welcome meditative pause, a small reminder that sometimes it's okay to just be.
I'll still watch that scene and think, what an unusual thing to see in a kid's cartoon of just like long runs of no dialogue with this like beautiful, somber kind of theme playing over it. And it just kind of really immerses you in the very unique emotions and feeling of the show.
What Hey Arnold did for me as a kid watching the show was it let me sit in those feelings and have it be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's beautiful.
Permission to feel melancholy.
Pauses like this were common in the show, usually as Arnold reflected on decisions or mistakes. It seems children are seldom offered portrayals of this simple pause in other cartoons, or kids' shows in general, quiet moments where characters dare to do nothing at all. It was a pretty unique choice for the show at the time, and it feels like it's becoming increasingly uncommon. Modern cartoons usually involve a magical or otherworldly premise of some kind, due in part to the massive success of the Harry Potter franchise. I would have enjoyed shows like this as much as the next person, but there's also something to be said about quiet and low-key moments, especially in animated works geared towards children. It makes me think of the stunning work done by Hayao Miyazaki in Studio Ghibli, where the technique to emphasize moments of silence and contemplation is often employed. In an interview with Roger Ebert in 2002, Miyazaki discussed this silence, describing it as intentional emptiness. He said, "The people who make the movies are scared of silence, so they want to paper and plaster it over. They're worried that the audience will get bored. But just because it's 80% intense all the time doesn't mean the kids are going to bless you with their concentration. What really matters is the underlying emotions, that you never let go of those." What my friends and I have been trying to do since the 1970s is to try and quiet things down a little bit. Don't just bombard them with noise and distraction, and to follow the path of children's emotions and feelings as we make a film. I think intentional emptiness is exactly what Bartlett's trying to achieve here. Watching Arnold toss and turn on his sofa is a lot like watching Chihiro lying solemnly in the backseat of her parents' car. Even though they're young children in media largely meant for other children, they're not portrayed as constantly energetic or restless. They're allowed to be still and pensive, to have an inner life. Sometimes seeing a character silently wrestle with problems conveys their plight in a more revealing way. And like Miyazaki said, the emotions behind a character's actions are critically important, even to children. In the case of Hey Arnold, Bartlett found inspiration for intentional emptiness in a specific show he grew up with, Charlie Brown. In an era of cartoons focused on wacky physical humor, Charlie Brown stood out to Bartlett as uniquely melancholic and minimal. He was astounded there was a cartoon about feelings.
"I think there must be something wrong with me, Linus. Christmas is coming, but I'm not happy. I don't feel the way I'm supposed to feel.
Even as a little Charlie Brown age kid, I was like, man, this is revolutionary. I can't believe it. This is a cartoon about feeling bad. When I got to make Hey Arnold, I'm like, if Charlie Brown exists in this universe, I can make a show about that's kind of melancholy and kind of blue and really touches on those feelings about childhood where you're powerless and you don't know what's going on. You're just trying to figure the world out.
When he started work on Hey Arnold decades later, he was determined to make it the Charlie Brown of the 90s. The show's meant to be generally calm, reflective, and also a bit sad, with a sensitive and introspective main character. And like Charlie Brown, Hey Arnold was accompanied by soothing jazz music, this time composed by Jim Lang, which was a major factor in the melancholy aesthetic. After Arnold is snapped out of his fantasies, he's welcomed with the reality of his normal but still meaningful existence. It's a reality we all have to face, but Hey Arnold reminds us not to take these everyday adventures for granted. Our day-to-day lives may not be as glorious as our greatest fantasies, but they're often not as empty as we make them out to be. In Nickelodeon Animation Podcast, Bartlett joked one of the major themes of Hey Arnold was disappointment. It's common for kids shows to have cut-and-dried solutions to conflicts, and Hey Arnold was no exception. But in this show, it was equally common for an episode to end in disappointment, a feeling the characters often had to sit with and accept. It's profound that a kids show so regularly finish episodes with loose ends or imperfect conclusions. In the first episode of the series, Arnold's accidentally responsible for the destruction of Eugene's new bike. Having this bike was a high point in Eugene's life, as he was the dorky and unlucky kid.
I guess every dork has his day.
Arnold spends the entire episode trying to make things right, only to inadvertently cause Eugene more and more grief. In the end, Eugene is still grateful for Arnold's efforts, as he knows his intentions were good, but things didn't work out perfectly. Eugene didn't get a new bike in the end, nor did he stop being unlucky. But Arnold, and other kids throughout the series' 5 seasons, had to learn to live with not being able to fix everything. This is a common theme throughout the show.
You know, Arnold, you taught me a great thing. Now I can harass people from my stoop and from off my stoop.
Gee, that wasn't really the point.
Pigeon Man flies away after kids destroy his home, Arnold's romantic pursuits always prove futile, and children are disappointed by adults more times than we can count. Sometimes we have to live with the disappointment and perhaps even learn from it, and that's okay.
Gotta look up, you gotta be strong, you gotta take things as they come. 'Cause everything new that happens to you is better when you look up.
Life can be messy, and the series respects its young audience enough to acknowledge their emotional intelligence. It doesn't condescend. That leads me to another point. The characters in the show are complex. Even the bullies aren't totally one-dimensional, which is rare in a kids show, and 2 of them are considered part of the main friend group. Most episodes delve into the backgrounds of the characters Arnold interacts with, in an almost Simpsons-like exploration of the neighborhood's many recurring characters. One of the most memorable examples of character exploration is the season 4 episode, Helga on the Couch.
Our school district psychologist, Dr. Bliss.
Whoop-de-doo, the school shrink. Bring it on, I've got nothing to hide.
Instead of being split into 2 11-minute episodes, the entire 24-minute slot is dedicated to Helga's backstory. She talks about her demanding dad and alcoholic mother who tend to neglect her in favor of her successful sister, and how she's hopelessly in love with the one person in her life who noticed her and treated her with kindness. The kids in the show are commonly shown feeling isolated and misunderstood, as children often do. There's also a nod to Edward Hopper in the episode, whose paintings tend to evoke feelings of hopeful loneliness. Helga points out the painting in the therapist's office and is clearly knowledgeable about the subject, showing she's an intelligent and well-read kid who's underestimated by her parents and peers. There's no doubt Helga's a bully, but trying to understand characters past their surface tendencies, provided the show contributes enough substance for interpretation, can reveal the root of their behavior. This is what makes them three-dimensional, and might lead to important development down the line. This also applies to real-life people, but more on that later. The kids in the series have nuanced problems and personalities like real kids, and they have feelings and motivations that are just as valid as adults. Speaking of adults, the adult characters in the show aren't always portrayed as wise and faultless. They're often just as flawed or bizarre as the children, if not more so. In the episode Vacant Lot, the group has a hard time playing baseball in the street because of passing cars. They come across a grassy area littered with junk and work together tirelessly to clean it up and use it as a baseball field. The grown-ups in the neighborhood end up discovering the lot and use it for their own hobbies, disregarding the kids entirely. While the children were portrayed earlier as cooperative and unified, the adults can't seem to agree on anything.
I never knew Mrs. Vitello had such a good right hook.
Or that Mr. Green had such a glass jaw.
After the grown-ups take over the lot, the kids retaliate by trashing it again to put it in its original state.
If you want your outfield so badly, you can have it just the way we found it. Done.
The adults realize their mistake, and following the example set by the children, they work together to restore the lot, not for themselves, but for the kids who earned it in the first place. The episode is meant to showcase the powerlessness children often feel, as grown-ups always have control.
When you're a kid, you don't really have any power, you don't have money, you don't have the freedom to go do what you want. You're kind of in school, and then you got to go home and do your homework. And so I was going to try to make a show about that, like, what do they feel like about childhood? And so it was really about kind of feelings.
It also serves to show that sometimes even grown-ups can do the wrong thing.
We gotta fess up to the facts that you kids were right and we were wrong.
Perhaps there's a backwards narrative at play here, a contradiction to the idea that our elders know best. As kids, we're usually led to believe grown-ups always provide the sound wisdom and sage advice. So why are some of the adults in this cartoon so callous or selfish or stupid? Well, because that's reality. Hey Arnold showed us sometimes grown-ups can be just as clueless or mean as kids. And having been an adult for about a decade now, I guarantee it's more common than we originally thought. But Arnold and his friends dealt with the disappointments in their lives, including the ones caused by adults. Sometimes they did it poorly or pessimistically, but life is messy that way and there's always room for growth. If anything, it tells us life will go on regardless of the disappointments. We can grow from them, move on, and strive for better as best we can.
You stupid for slugging her. I gotta get a windshield.
I wasn't originally going to include this topic in the essay, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a crucial aspect to the show's uniqueness and appeal. Most cartoons depicted nuclear families living in suburbia. Even the Powerpuff Girls lived outside of the city despite usually fighting crime within it. Meanwhile, Arnold lived in an old boarding house under a freeway in a fictional city inspired by Seattle, Portland, and New York. Bartlett felt it was a necessary choice to give the series more of an adventure feel. He grew up in Seattle and felt an urban setting for Hey Arnold could act as an escapist fantasy. The kids rode buses, took the subway, and traveled around town without adult supervision. Bartlett felt this provided a sense of freedom for children watching the show who wished they could do the same. And for the children who travel this way regularly, it also provided a layer of relatability. The urban legend episodes in particular always enthralled me as a kid. They're a bit silly in retrospect, but as a child I was captivated by the half-mystery, half-horror aspect of the tales. Bartlett said they tried to put at least one or two in every season to support the theme of urban adventure. The legend usually started with Sid introducing Gerald.
I've never heard of the Pigeon Man. Who's he?
Okay, Sid. Lead me in, babe.
The legend of the Pigeon Man has been handed down from kid generation to kid generation for as long as I can remember, which was about since I was 3. Take it away, Gerald.
Gerald would then dramatically unfold the tale of Wheezin' Ed, or the Ghost Bride, or Monkey Man, and the kids would set off to investigate the unknown.
You don't want to mess with the unknown. I messed with the unknown one time.
What happened?
Nothing. But it could have been horrible.
Along with some of these legitimately creepy episodes, there are also episodes which couldn't really take place except in an urban setting. 2 parallel episodes called Heat and Snow explore how the neighborhood responds to extreme summer heat versus a snow day. Both scenarios emphasize community interaction, whereas in a suburban neighborhood, extensive interaction would typically be reserved for family and friends. The writers took advantage of the show's setting to present dilemmas and hijinks in an uncommon way. Arnold's room is a reflection of the physical freedom he has in his life and in his community. I remember wishing I had a room like this, with a clear ceiling through which you could look at the sky and feel a little less confined. You could open it up to the roof and from there look down at the lights illuminating the city and wonder what everyone was up to in their own little slice of the world. Perhaps the most notable aspect of the urban setting was the inclusion of a wide range of characters, varying in race, class, religion, and even sexual orientation. There are foreign characters whose accents aren't played for laughs, and an exploration of cultures through the lens of young children. There's the episode about Harold's bar mitzvah, which, along with certain Rugrats episodes, was my first exposure to Jewish culture as a kid. In the first season's Christmas episode, the show referenced Mr. Wynn's experience as a refugee during the Vietnam War, which we'll touch more on later. There's a Thanksgiving episode where it's heavily implied that Arnold's kind and supportive teacher is gay, which was confirmed by Bartlett in recent years. In regards to positive LGBTQ representation, it seems Heavy Implication was the best they could do for an American kids show in 1998. Still, in all these cases and more, the show didn't reduce people into caricatures based on their backgrounds. Overall, it attempted to paint them in a positive and sympathetic light. A young boy trying to mature and take on responsibility. A humble man yearning for his family separated by a war crisis. A caring teacher with a passion for education. I didn't feel these characters were too different from me in order to take an interest in their stories. Instead, I wanted to learn more about them. What language was Harold reading? Why did Mr. Wynn have to leave his country? We grew familiar with all kinds of people in Arnold City from all walks of life, living alongside each other like it was no big deal, because it isn't. And no, it's not forced diversity. Big cities are home to a medley of different people, and Arnold's neighborhood is no different. As a kid, it felt normal and even fascinating to be surrounded by different kinds of people. And Hey Arnold reinforced that feeling. Hey Arnold emphasized community like no other cartoon I knew. It centered on an empathetic kid who always tried to help others in his neighborhood, not just his friends or family, but often strangers who he didn't fully understand. The show stressed the idea that everyone has their own story, including your favorite celebrity, immigrant neighbor, even the ice cream man. Arnold's character encompasses the compassionate nature we're all capable of. Instead of dismissing or mocking the cruel or unusual characters he encountered, he did what he could to understand them and help them. I touched on this willingness to sympathize earlier, when I discussed Helga's therapy episode. It's another example of how, if we're willing to look beyond what people present on the outside, whether it's their looks or surface-level behaviors, we can learn the root of their behavior and consequently recognize the common humanity we share. This idea was encouraged in episodes like Miss Perfect, where, after bullying the seemingly perfect new girl in class, the girls discover her dismal home life and realize their misplaced frustrations. The show also promotes the dignity of selfless acts. Perhaps the best example of this is in the episode Arnold's Christmas. When the boarding house tenants draw for Secret Santa, Arnold gets Mr. Wynn. He realizes he doesn't actually know much about Mr. Wynn, and while fishing for ideas for a Christmas gift, he uncovers his story. In an attempt to escape Vietnam as violence escalated during the war, Mr. Wynn took the opportunity to send his infant daughter away to America, but hasn't been able to reunite with her since. Arnold spends the rest of the episode trying to find Mr. Wynn's daughter, to no avail. We already know Arnold is a compassionate and sensitive character. This episode isn't really about Arnold's empathy, but Helga's. As she searches for a Christmas gift for Arnold, she realizes the only thing he wants is for Mr. Wynn to see his daughter again. Through an unfortunate turn of events, the only way for her to help make this happen is to give up her prized new boots.
Criminy. Another moral dilemma.
And convince a government worker to search with her through the night. In the end, Helga has no boots and no glory. No one had any idea she helped at all. But the result was enough. The knowledge that she helped others was enough. That's not just what Christmas should be about, but what every day should be about. It's a lesson in foregoing trivial comforts in favor of making others' lives better. There's a Fred Rogers quote that gets tossed around a lot when tragedy strikes. When I was a boy and I would see scary things on the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." While this is certainly comforting for children who often feel powerless in the face of tragedy, and perhaps even for adults who are weary with the world's constant influx of bad news,
It's for world peace, Helga.
Yeah, I used to believe in all that stuff once.
it's not always helpful to go back to this quote every time something terrible happens. It was meant to remind us the good in humanity will always be present, but at some point, we can't simply look for the helpers. In some ways, Hey Arnold helped teach us to be the helpers. It seemed to be the type of simple cartoon Mr. Rogers would have wanted kids to watch. A show that emphasized processing feelings in a healthy way and promoted love and acceptance. If we're really honest with ourselves, most of us aren't an Arnold. We're more likely a Helga or a Sid or a Rhonda or a Harold. Our propensity for compassion often fails us, and we have to actively learn to be better people. Sometimes we have to go out of our comfort zones to do things for the benefit of others, or to learn and unlearn certain ideas and perceptions. We're all capable of being an Arnold. We just have to try.
I just hope there's another Arnold where I go next.
Anyway, That about wraps up how I think Hey Arnold made us feel the way it did. It was a funny cartoon with a premise that wasn't extraordinary by any means, but what it tried to say about emptiness, about compassion, about life, really meant something greater. And I think it'll stick with us for a long time.
Okay, you couch potatoes, enough of this boob tube twat.